They called them flying fortresses. The Allies called them strategic weapons. The Luftwaffe called them a problem. But for 2 terrifying years, heavy American daylight raids into Germany were punished brutally. And the reason wasn't just enemy fighters or flak. It was the distance. American fighter escorts couldn't reach the targets. German pilots learned to expect the bombers alone, and they struck with savage efficiency. That only changed when a new fighter and a bold strategy finally broke the Luftwaffe's nerve. This is the story of doubt, of attrition, and of how the Mustang changed the skies over Europe. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Allied air planners embraced a powerful idea. Precision strategic bombing could cripple an enemy's war industry. The U.S. Army Air Forces invested in heavily armed high-altitude bombers, especially the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, confident their multiple machine guns and tight formations would protect them from enemy fighters. Many senior officers believed large formations could largely fend for themselves. Fighter technology and range, they thought, would catch up later. That belief, however, ran headlong into reality when American bombers began flying deep into Europe without continuous fighter cover. Early escorts, Spitfires, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings, were brave and capable, but the math was brutal. Most fighters could only accompany the bomber streams as far as the Low Countries or the German border. Escort aircraft were forced to turn back long before the targets, leaving B-17s and B-24s to press on into the heart of Nazi Germany alone. German radar, ground controllers, and experienced fighter pilots exploited that window. The result? Missions that planned for industrial damage too often turned into carnage. Bombers shredded by wave after wave of Luftwaffe interceptors once their escorts peeled off. The August 17, 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid and the later Black Thursday Schweinfurt mission in October 1943 are the clearest symbols of that failure. On August 17, hundreds of B-17s struck ball-bearing works and aircraft factories deep inside Germany. Escort was partial and sporadic. The bomber formations were repeatedly ambushed. 60 B-17s were lost on that mission alone. Many more were badly damaged, and crews were killed or captured. The October Schweinfurt raid, which came to be known as Black Thursday, saw similar losses, a devastating price that forced U.S. commanders to rethink their strategy. These missions exposed the core truth. Long-range escort was not an optional luxury, it was essential. Those heavy losses convinced Allied leadership to temper their daylight offensive until they could reduce bomber vulnerability. They shifted priorities, sometimes halting deep raids, shifting to nearer targets, or coordinating with RAF night bombing. Meanwhile, an urgent technological and operational effort began. Find or create fighters that could travel the distance and survive at bomber altitudes. Refine escort tactics, and strike at the Luftwaffe's ability to mass fighter opposition. The answer would be both hardware and strategy, but the hardware arrived first. Enter the North American P-51 Mustang. Born from a British requirement, but transformed with a Rolls-Royce Merlin, built by Packard in the U.S., the Merlin-engined Mustang suddenly had the high-altitude performance and the fuel efficiency to match. Coupled with external drop tanks and modifications that added internal fuel capacity, the Mustang could escort heavy bombers deep into Germany and back, sometimes flying hundreds of miles further than any previous single-engine fighter. In combat in 1944, the Mustang shifted the calculus. Where bombers had once been fat targets, they now had a fighter screen that could turn on enemy interceptors and hunt them along the route. Importantly, Mustang doctrine matured fast.
Early escort thinking emphasized staying close to the bombers, protect the formation at all costs. Mustang pilots, however, learned that to truly protect the bomber stream, they had to be aggressive, go out to meet the Luftwaffe, pursue German fighters back to their bases, and deny them the ability to mass. Escort missions became sweeps and fighter-destroyer tasks as well as defensive screens. That offensive approach, combined with the Mustang's range and performance, meant German pilots no longer invariably enjoyed the late-stage opportunity to engage unescorted bombers. The critical test came in February 1944 during Operation Argument, known to history as Big Week. For 6 days, the 8th and 15th Air Forces and RAF Bomber Command mounted coordinated attacks against German aircraft production, engines, and components. The Allies massed fighters and used the new long-range Mustangs in large numbers. The Luftwaffe was lured into a pitched battle and suffered catastrophic losses in experienced pilots and aircraft. While Allied bomber losses remained significant, the price paid by the Luftwaffe could not be sustained. From Big Week onward, the Luftwaffe's ability to contest the air over Germany steadily declined. The myth that bombers could go unescorted evaporated, and the new reality took hold. American escorts could not only reach the target, they could establish air superiority. What did that feel like from the German side? Experienced Luftwaffe pilots who had grown confident in their intercept procedures suddenly faced a new kind of threat. No longer did they routinely find bombers nearly helpless once Allied fighters turned away. Now P-51s could escort all the way, and if German pilots attacked the bombers, they risked being engaged by the escorts themselves. The effect was psychological as well as material. German formations became more cautious. The Luftwaffe diverted resources to defend airfields and production, and the loss of veteran pilots, those that could best read and survive aerial combat, hurt training and morale. The doubts German pilots once had about American escorts, perhaps depending on propaganda and underestimations, were replaced with a grudging respect and a dawning fear. Once Allied fighters could escort to the target and exert control, the consequences multiplied. Bombing runs became somewhat less hazardous, allowing more concentrated attacks against critical factories, ball-bearing plants, and oil refineries, targets the Germans increasingly struggled to defend. Strategic bombing tightened the screws on Germany's wartime production and its ability to replace aircraft and train pilots. At the same time, Allied air superiority enabled more direct support of ground operations, interdiction, close air support, and the destruction of transport and logistics. The skies over Europe no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. That said, the arrival of the Mustang and the success of Big Week were not instant cures. Bomber Command still faced heavy losses at times. Flak remained deadly. Weather and navigation errors could scatter formations, and the Luftwaffe attempted countermeasures, including new aircraft types and tactics. But the trend was decisive. Attrition of German pilots and the cumulative pressure on German production helped tip the balance. Air superiority in 1944 did not emerge from a single plane or a single week. It was the product of technology, tactics, industrial production, and relentless pressure. Throughout this transformation were thousands of airmen, bomber crews who rode through flak and fighters, and fighter pilots who learned to fly hundreds of miles at high altitude to protect strangers who might never know their names. Many Mustang pilots traded the thrill of dogfighting for the less glamorous job of bodyguard, yet their work saved aircraft and lives. At the same time, Luftwaffe pilots, veterans of early victories, were ground down, sometimes replaced by hastily trained recruits who lacked experience. War in the air is a human story of endurance, loss, and adaptation. So did bomber formations ever truly fly unchallenged? Not in the sense of total immunity, but by 1944, the balance had shifted. Where German fighters had once savored a late-stage feast, American long-range escorts often chased them off or hunted them down. The doubt German pilots once had about American escorts, perhaps depending on propaganda and underestimations, were replaced with a grudging respect and a dawning fear. The skies had changed. The bomber campaign, bloodied early on, evolved into a coordinated, protected, and ultimately decisive component of the Allied victory.